recently was a creative writing professor at St. Mary the Woods College. Now he's transferred into another type of job. But I can see how he's taken that interest in creative writing to transform it into creative placemaking, and it's going to be centered around breweries. And what is more enjoyed in Irvington than Placemaker Brewery? So, Bill, please start.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thanks for having me here. I want to thank Indiana Humanities for their support of this talk. They're the ones that have funded this grant. And really, what my talk does is present about 3 case studies, but probably a few more than that, even micro case studies perhaps, that highlight craft beer's role in creative placemaking. And I'll get into a little bit about what that means here in a moment. It's basically a practice that leverages both the arts and local economies to build character in local communities. And I can't think of an organization that does that better in Irvington than the building we're sitting in, which is the Bona Thompson Community Center. First, I want to echo some things about me. I used to be kind of your standard English professor by day, beer columnist by night. I wrote a craft beer column called Beer Flight in Terre Haute, Indiana, which I still live in Terre Haute. And I'm a bit more slowly now that I'm not strictly a writer and a creative writing professor, still working on a beer travel book called Beer Run, 12 Great Midwestern Beer Trips. So I kind of took this interest in beer and craft beer and the culture behind it, and I married it with this idea of creative placemaking. So first of all, what is creative placemaking? So creative placemaking was first standardized about 20 years ago in a white paper for the National Endowment for the Arts. Anne Marcuson and Anne Godwa defined creative placemaking as this. So in creative placemaking, partners from public, private, and nonprofit and community sectors strategically shape the physical and social character of a neighborhood, town, city, or region around arts and cultural activities. Creative placemaking animates public and private spaces, it rejuvenates structures and streetscapes, it improves local business viability and public safety, and it brings diverse people together to celebrate, inspire, and be inspired. And as I kind of dealt with the craft beer community, particularly in Indiana, but across the Midwest, really, I saw these kind of pieces of creative placemaking, which we usually associate with the arts or historical culture or things like that. I saw the craft beer community taking hold of these concepts and, in fact, using those concepts in stronger ways than arts organizations had done in the past. And so I thought, maybe it would be interesting to think about these creative arts organizations, thinking about stealing back, really, what craft beer has stolen from them. And I say steal, I mean it in the best possible way. I mean, what can we learn and apply to our own efforts? And so just a few things about creative economies, because creative economies can be a really big force in local economies. So creative economies in this country host 2 million artists, 3.6 million cultural workers, 4.9 million cultural industry jobs. It fosters economic development. It recirculates residents' incomes locally at a higher rate. It reuses vacant and underutilized land, buildings, and infrastructure. It creates jobs in construction, local businesses, and cultural activity. It expands entrepreneurial ranks of artists and designers. It trains the next generation of cultural workers. And it attracts and retains non-arts related businesses and skills. And so today I'm going to kind of show you the ways in which craft beer has linked into this creative placemaking idea in hopes that people who need to be engaged in creative placemaking, those cultural organizations, can use some of those tactics back into their own organizations. So pictured here, no stranger to Irvington, this is the original 18th Street Brewery in Gary, Indiana. Now, if I asked you first, before the big reveal here, what you think about when you think about Gary, Indiana, it is unlikely that you would think of this quite modern, interesting, artistic space. However, 18th Street Brewery has really been a force, especially in the Miller neighborhood of Gary, to kind of revitalize that area. And 18th Street has just put a tap room in right down the road here, kind of on the edge of Irvington. And they're trying to do the same thing right here in this community. So I thought it was a great thing to include. So they moved into this building in 2015. And back when it was announced they were moving out of their old location, people in town were worried that they were leaving Gary because they started in Gary. And as we know, if you're in a community that has kind of struggled to launch, like Gary has recently since the steel mills and things like that have gone away, when you get a good thing in that community, you want it to be a multiplier. And you're always kind of worried in the back of your head that it's going to go away, that this nice thing that your community has might go away. However, 18th Street was just going to move 4 doors down and buy a place instead of rent. They wanted to actually invest more into the community. And Drew Fox, who's the owner of 18th Street Brewery, had this to say. 18th Street's new location deeper into the Miller Business District should generate more foot traffic for other businesses like Indie Bang Bang, which is a cultural arts organization there, the Miller Bakery Cafe. Customers come to the current location at the edge of the Miller neighborhood and leave without further exploring to see Lake Michigan, the beach, the recently renovated Marquette Park, or any other of Miller's attractions. The new Miller location will be cleaner and more continuous without a dining room that's segregated from the bar. It will also feature a private lounge for backers of the brewery's original Kickstarter campaign. And here's the quote I really like from Drew Fox. "We're not leaving Gary. This is still our first home." And so what Fox did in moving deeper into this neighborhood that needed some revitalization is understand that it's not pure capitalism when you are trying to revitalize an area. That the success of your business depends on how much you can drive a culture that might be focused on driving business to other businesses in the area. It's kind of a backwards concept for a lot of us Americans, right? Where we want to win when it comes to business. Instead, he's really taking some concepts from creative placemaking and saying, by being a multiplier, by inspiring a revitalization that I might not solely benefit from, we can do some really great things for my own business. So speaking of not leaving, when we think about beer and local breweries, we have to think a little creatively about what creative placement quite looks like. Because again, I want to reiterate, creative placemaking is an arts and culture concept. It's not a beer concept. So here on the left, just some kind of interesting parts about beer culture that I think are important to understand. So here on the left, we've got just a set of really brightly colored cans, and I know that the light in here is bright and we may not be able to see it that well, but this is a Facebook post, and it's a group called the 450 North Discussion and Trading Group. And 450 North is a really, I don't think we in Indiana understand how popular this brewery is. It's in rural Columbus, Indiana, rural Bartholomew County down south. This is a brewery that inspires beer trading groups who somewhat illegally go and collect all these cans of beer. They ship them up in usually flat rate boxes, and they send them all across the country in exchange for somebody else's local beer. And there's all these kind of trading groups where, hey, if you go get me this beer, I'll send you this beer from my brewery. And the script here says Dustin Stroll, who, by the way, is now a brewer in Terre Haute, is the man. Best packing job I've seen for these types of beers. Cans are still fairly cold to touch. Wow. Now, the important thing about the temperature here is 450 North, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, specializes in a really unique style of beer. It's really a Berliner Weiss, which is a light, tart German-style beer with pounds and pounds, we're talking thousands of pounds of fruit puree. They call them slushies, is what 450 North calls. The style they call it is a smoothie-style Berliner Weiss. And these are very unique. They've been replicated a lot by breweries across the country, but 450 North is really one of the breweries that started this style of beer. And so, thus, Dustin Stroll, again, a buddy of mine from Terre Haute, is a really popular national beer trader because he will go and he will stake out, you see some lawn chairs in front of porta potties here, stake out a spot in line at the 450 North can releases. Now, 450 North is in the middle of a cornfield, again, in Bartholomew County, and they really started like any other craft brewery. Some folks got together and said, we really like doing this, we want to be creative, let's buy some space and make some beer. But by being unique, by creating a culture surrounding a style of beer, and they shift in what kind of fruit purees they do, have created a culture surrounding it. A culture which, so 450 North, they will do a can release every other Friday. And the release starts at 7 a.m. on Friday morning. These lawn chairs have been out in front of those porta potties since Thursday night, staking out a place. Because 450 North is out of beer at about 8 a.m. Lines and lines of people. You see the Starbucks cup. The timestamp on this post here is 5:34 a.m. Guy in the middle of a dark cornfield with a Starbucks cup waiting to get the max allotment of these smoothie-style beers, not to drink himself, but to send out across the country somewhat, again, legally. So this is creative placemaking. This is what creative placemaking looks like in the craft beer community. It's taking a style and going deeper into that style to create a culture around it and something that your area is particularly known for. And 450 North does a really nice job of getting kind of local fruit a lot of times for their puree. Again, they go a little deeper into their own community. A lot of times we think about beer in that macro style that was so popular, especially in the 80s and earlier. If I go back to my title slide here, this is actually a picture of the Terre Haute Brewing Company the day Prohibition ended. And you see, which is kind of startling picture in COVID times, because I'm not ready to stand in a crowded beer hall with a bunch of people unmasked, but people shoulder to shoulder celebrating, and they were probably drinking something that tastes a lot like Budweiser tastes today. Terre Haute Brewing Company was actually the 7th largest brewery nationwide pre-Prohibition. And we think about Terre Haute now, not something that has a lot of national appeal. The difference here, this has national appeal, just like Terre Haute Brewing Company had a long time ago. But while Terre Haute Brewing Company pre-Prohibition was playing to the masses, 450 North is going deeper into an individual style culture that makes them unique and different. And so I think that's something we can learn as arts organizations, that we can't necessarily appeal to mass appeal and what is working in other locations. We've got to find our own thing. In order to do that, we should think about our place. This is a picture of Bearded Iris. It's a very popular brewery in Nashville, Tennessee. Bearded Iris is nothing to look at, as you can see. It's actually, this is in a light industrial complex in downtown Nashville. Google Maps sometimes takes you the right way to this brewery. You're right next to people making widgets and things like that. It's not a bar on the main drag of Nashville that tourists really go to, except tourists go here. It is a destination brewery. And the reason why it's a destination brewery is they have linked into one style of beer, and they do it better almost than anybody else. They've taken this style of beer called a New England IPA, which you might think, Nashville, Tennessee, New England, not nearly the same area. But New England IPAs, when we think of an IPA, we sometimes think about really hoppy and bitter. New England IPAs are hazy, and they're often, they bring out the fruitiness of the hops and are not that bitter at all, really. But you see they've kind of adapted to this older kind of Art Deco. There's a nice wood old bar behind there. Back here is where they make the beer, actually, and you can't walk back there. But they've transformed this light industrial space. They've made it look like, on the bar side, that it could be kind of this old Nashville haunt, but this is a very new brewery. And the menu behind there has 10 beers, probably 9 of them are New England IPAs of different sorts with different hops. It is a destination brewery. So go back to what I said creative economies do. They create jobs. Yes, absolutely, both in Columbus and Nashville. That area of rural Columbus has totally transformed to serve the people that come on that pilgrimage every other week. There's a new gas station right down the road where you can go get snacks to wait in line. There's a Starbucks that went in right off the exit, right? Because 4 o'clock waiting for beer, you need some coffee, right? There's all this expansion, and it really is down to the influx of tourists that are coming here for this specific, interesting, new thing that feels unique to that area, okay? It recirculates resident incomes. Yes, absolutely. So when it's not can release day, still, it's a destination brewery for people in the area. And this is a locally owned spot. This isn't the Miller Coors Brew Pub in Columbus, Indiana. In fact, Miller Coors would say, well, you're not going to get enough people. We're not going to move a Gordon Beer as their brew pub kind of chain. We're not going to move that in there. But 450 North is a destination for locals as well. They kind of stay out of the standing in line, though. It reuses vacant and underutilized land. Absolutely. This was a cornfield until about 7 years ago. Creates jobs in construction. They are constantly adding on to this complex so they can make more beer. Expands entrepreneurial ranks of artists and designers. Absolutely. Because these beer heads, these hop heads, they come to Columbus, they pick up their beer at 7 a.m. and they say, now what? And there's been other little microbreweries that have popped up in the area, and people can really make a weekend out of it if you're a beer enthusiast. It trains the next generation of workers. We have not really had, since the Terre Haute Brewing Company, this idea of a Indiana town where somebody is a brewer or a master brewer. And I really think this is the kind of skill that is going to start getting passed down as we see the craft beer movement that really started in the late 90s get old enough to get generational. And it attracts and retains non-arts-related businesses and skills. The big industry in Columbus, Indiana is Cummins, diesel engines. They are constantly trying to recruit young engineers. And Columbus has done a great job of making the downtown friendly to young people and young families. But you go ask Cummins if they like that a destination brewery is right on the outskirts of their town. They absolutely love it because it's something for those people to do on the weekends. Cummins had a big problem in the 90s and early 2000s with their young executives choosing to live downtown Indianapolis and drive down 65 to work in Columbus, Indiana. Now they're building a culture, and I think it's really a lot to do with 450 North. It's the same thing we're seeing in Nashville, Tennessee with Bearded Iris. This used to be a light industrial area. The homes around it used to be kind of run down and serving low-income workers of that light industrial area. Now that light industrial area has a more commercial aspect, and I know there are some downsides with gentrification as well, but the area around there, this is now a neighborhood, a cultural arts district. And it started with Bearded Iris Brewery. Okay, so we have this old Bavarian beer purity law, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it. I'm way too Irish to be able to pronounce this German word, Reinheitsgebot. Yeah, okay, give me some help. What is it again? Reinheitsgebot, great. It requires, and this really came out of some food safety laws in 18th century Germany, but it required that your beer could only have 4 ingredients. Of course, craft beer has had fun playing with that, talked about 450 North with the pounds of fruit puree. But it said, in order for it to be beer, it can have 4 ingredients. It needs to have water, it needs to have hops, it needs to have barley, it needs to have yeast. That's it. That's all you can have. And the more I thought about this, the more I thought that this is an interesting matrix for creative organizations to use in order to think about what makes it a distinct place. I hope that the first part of my presentation has shown that being an area of distinction and driving into that distinction rather than trying to have a broader appeal actually gives you a broader appeal. And so I think it's a really interesting matrix. One of the reasons why is we often don't think about water being an ingredient for beer. In fact, water is the biggest ingredient for beer. Water also is of a place. If you go to Ireland, anybody know what style of beer you should expect to be drinking often in Ireland? What's the big beer in Ireland? Big macro beer? Guinness, absolutely, a dry Irish stout. Do you know why Guinness is popular in Ireland? Why it took off being made in Ireland? It's because of the water. The mineral content in Irish water fits the style of a dry Irish stout. It develops the taste of the toasted barley. It is a highly mineral water, and it's perfect for making that style of beer. If you go to Dublin and try to make an IPA, you will need a reverse osmosis water system because you're going to need to start from scratch and add minerals back in. The water is not good for it. But you can take water right out of the tap in Dublin and make a nice dry Irish stout. And so I like starting with water because water is of a place. And it is unique to that place. It differentiates that place. And so I've got these little brainstorming sheets. And I will supply these so they can kind of be shown on the website because I know a lot of people will be watching this on the website. But I've got this. And it's got the 4 main ingredients according to the Bavarian purity laws. But we're going to think about Irvington, and this can be done for any location. So if you're watching from Bloomington, and you want to think about how we can develop creative placemaking efforts in Bloomington, you can certainly do that, okay? But the first thing I'm going to ask you to do, in that top left section where we see the drop of water, I want you to think about what differentiates Irvington. We're going to call these things the water of Irvington. What makes Irvington different than, let's say, Broad Ripple even, another similar neighborhood in Indianapolis? What makes Irvington different than another style of this neighborhood in, say, Columbus, Ohio, a similar city to Indianapolis? What is Irvington's water? And so I want you to go ahead and write down 3 or 4 things. And then, this could be a good exercise for you to do in a group, even digitally. And I would ask you to share those things once you write them down. What'd you come up with? What'd you brainstorm? So go ahead. And by the way, what we're going to be doing with these lists is it's something to inspire your thinking later about what might guide future creative placemaking efforts. All right, so I believe we're going to add some time in on the video. Let's go ahead and move forward. So I want to make this point because I think it can feel a little silly to somebody on the outside of the craft beer movement to use breweries as a comparison to cultural arts organizations. But breweries are really more than bars, and they invite other economic development. This is kind of a heuristic developed by Artscape DIY, which is a Toronto-based organization. And it talks a little bit about why cities should try to invest in creative placemaking. And it really stems from this problem that cities, but small towns fit into this too. I'm a native of Greenfield, Indiana, right down US 40. And the downtown has really gone through something of a renaissance in the last 5 years. But it's been a result of them confronting structural changes and residential uprooting. As we cycle through, I think we see this cycle every 50 years or so, where people move to urban spaces, or they move to suburban spaces, or they move to small towns. They see one or the other desirable based on certain cultural factors. We have to confront that if we're a place-based organization. We have to think about how we deal with that and respond to that. And I think breweries also have to do that. You think about breweries as any other kind of restaurant, but also a brewery is trying to, the best case scenario for any brewery is to become kind of that beer hall style venue where people go not just to have 6 beers, but they go to have 1 beer and spend some time maybe doing something else than just thinking about beer. Think about, and we'll explore the other things breweries are doing a little later. So the solution is revitalization by creative initiatives that animate places and spark economic development. Again, talking a little bit about what 18th Street did when they tried to move deeper into their neighborhood. It was really a function of people are going to come do this and this and this, even though they know they're opening themselves up to, people are going to come do 3 things that aren't our brewery, because you're creating a place. The payoffs are gains in livability, diversity, jobs, and incomes. Think about that center strip. And this is something, by the way, I think St. Louis, which I'm about to talk about in a minute, has really done well. You go to St. Louis and you think about these little burgs in the outskirts of St. Louis, places like Maplewood, where you have this commercial strip and then about 5 blocks on either side of that strip of really great old houses, but you can walk to these restaurants. You can walk to these shops. A lot of people walk to the grocery store. That is a gain in livability. It's also a gain in diversity, because the housing market surrounding all of this, it can really be expansive. You can have lower priced homes next to more expensive homes. Lower priced homes are welcome in that community because it's a community that's not reliant on car transportation. Everything you need is in walking distance. Jobs and incomes, well, small businesses have always kind of been the linchpin of the American economy. And this is a framework that really celebrates small businesses. But it also creates innovative products and services for the cultural industries. As people adapt to their particular audience, they will find things that work for that particular audience. So this is in St. Louis. This is the Missouri Botanical Gardens, which is in the Shaw neighborhood in St. Louis. So creative placemaking usually focuses on bringing high culture to a mass audience. And it does so in a way that is really uniquely tied to place and the demands of those citizens. So the reason why I have this Missouri Botanical Garden picture here is Missouri Botanical Gardens had a problem, not unlike every problem that faces a creative, historical, cultural organization these days. The people that give them money were getting very old. And I hear some knowing laughter. We're sitting in a cultural arts organization. Think about your patrons. What is that next generation of patron going to be? And I think it scares a lot of cultural arts organizations to think about that. And the reason why is we're getting a little older as a society. Our baby boomers, a large segment of the population, are getting older. And we're wondering how we can appeal to this next generation, Generation X, to carry on the torch of a lot of these organizations. So they were getting older. They had this beautiful, lush botanical garden that was well respected and enjoyed by an older organization, but they weren't appealing to younger families the way they thought they could be. They realized they were being probably a little too snooty in their appeals to fundraising events and activities. And so they actually brought in beer. St. Louis is a great beer town, and not just because of the Budweiser influence. St. Louis has a massive craft beer community, and nationally renowned craft breweries, things like Side Project and Narrow Gauge. These breweries are known around the country, and they're destination breweries. So what they did is they transformed this black tie gala that they had always had and made it a walking tour with beer stands throughout the botanical gardens. And what it allowed them to do is reach a new generation of patron, and it helped them get younger in terms of who was sitting on their board. It helped them get younger in terms of who was sending in that $100 annual gift. High culture, the botanical gardens, certainly with public art and outdoor art, to a mass audience, and helping people understand what is in a space like this for them. And it was really successful, and they've got now have a more thriving campaign. But one of the things that they did is they turned to their green spaces, these outdoor spaces. And I created this presentation pre-COVID. We didn't know what coronavirus really was when I started giving this talk. But it seems to me now more than ever, green spaces are really important to cultural and creative placemaking events. People want to be outside. They want to enjoy these green spaces. And so next on my matrix of brainstorming what we can do in Irvington to think about creative placemaking activities is to brainstorm a list of our green spaces. And we've seen a lot of creativity in green spaces recently with Eat in the Streets initiatives from cities in order to mitigate COVID-19. So what kind of green spaces? And I know we've got some really popular parks, but think a little bit more creatively than that. What can we use that is uniquely Irvington in order to craft a place? So go ahead and write in that hops area, the little leaf, what green spaces exist? So local imagination is something that we've been talking about a little bit today, and craft beer really has some lessons to provide cultural arts organizations in terms of trying to capture local imaginations. When I think about craft beer, often I think about these unique names for beers and labels for beers. So here on the left is a beer from right here in Indianapolis, Central State Brewery, which is in the Fall Creek neighborhood. They had this IPA a while back called Too Shallow for Commerce. Anybody know what that is a reference to?
Our White River.
The White River, absolutely. One of the most famous things about the White River is it's probably the largest waterway in the nation that is unsuitable for commerce because it's too shallow. Kurt Vonnegut famously once said, "I don't think anybody can navigate the White River through the city." In fact, that was a big challenge for his life, I think. I think you could probably do it via kayak now, but maybe not. So yeah, again, that's a place-focused beer name. And it's a story is what it is. This is a beer that if you're going to visit somebody in a different city, why go with something that isn't unique? Go with something that's unique to the neighborhood, unique to the town, and say, I got you this beer. It's kind of a funny name. Here's the story behind the name. Here in the middle, this is a picture of race car driver James Hinchcliffe, IndyCar driver. James Hinchcliffe is Canadian, actually, but like most IndyCar drivers do, moved to Indianapolis because that's where all the technology and the team is and all that stuff. He lives kind of at, I forget the Pogues Run area, where Flat 12 Brewery is. And he was such a frequent visitor of Flat 12 that they said, we've got the celebrity fan, we need to capitalize on this. So this is one of their flagship beers, is the Hinchtown Hammer Down, and named after him. It's got a little caricature of him on there. Again, they're trying to create this unique culture around their area, and they've said, James Hinchcliffe just stops in. This is his local. And we've got to capitalize on that. And so, again, another place-based, local-focused deal. Here on the right, Abita in New Orleans, Louisiana. It's something of a macro brewery these days. They're really mass producing. You can get Abita pretty much anywhere in the country. But they still, as less of a craft brewery than they used to be, are trying to capture local imaginations. You look at this label, you can guess probably in your first three guesses that Abita is based in New Orleans, Louisiana. We've got this Mardi Gras theme, kind of carnival guy with the famous colors of Mardi Gras, purple and gold. Purple Haze is the name of this beer. And so again, they're even trying to appeal to a broader audience, but they're trying to appeal by saying this is authentically of a place. This is something I saw as a resident of Terre Haute, Indiana, when they were bringing back the Terre Haute Brewing Company. So the Terre Haute Brewing Company, again, pre-Prohibition, the 7th largest brewery in the nation. They were shipping out huge amounts of Champagne Velvet was one of their big beers. It was the beer with the $1 million taste. Accounting for inflation, maybe the beer with the $1 billion taste. But, it was really like a Budweiser. Mass-produced, meant for a wide audience, working man after work beer. They knew if they tried to bring back the Terre Haute Brewing Company, it couldn't be that. It had to be Terre Haute for Terre Haute, not Terre Haute for the world. And so they really, bought into this idea. So they came back about 2015, and what they did is they took an old storehouse, and this is a massive industrial complex in downtown Terre Haute, really, that has really seen no life since Terre Haute Brewing Company closed in the early 1900s. What they did is they bought a storehouse, they refinished it to make it look historic, even though a lot of it was new construction. Think dark, think stained glass, think concrete. But they realized that it had to tie in to an arts movement. And so what they did is they created a banquet room that could also serve as a concert venue. They started holding plays there. They started holding comedy shows there. They started hosting concerts there. They also asked the local home brewing population to go in with them on a fundraiser for the art spaces, which is a public outdoor arts organization, public arts organization in Terre Haute, for the Arts and Crafts Brew-Off. And this has become a really popular fundraiser every year in Terre Haute, where you go around, and they haven't done it since COVID, obviously. You go around, you get samples of all these local home brewers' beers, you rank what you like, and then some judges, including yours truly, pick the home brewer of the year in the Wabash Valley. It's a really fun event. Again, they took this old macro brewery and said, what is uniquely of this place? And now they're starting to gain some traction outside of that place because it's an interesting story to tell. But it's a story tied uniquely to that place. Big Woods down in Nashville, Indiana, really same kind of deal. I grew up going to Brown County with my parents. This artisan community in southern Indiana where all these great woodworkers and leather workers and watercolor painters and jewelers were really setting up shop and delivering their craft in a really unique way. And it was sad in the 90s to see Nashville, Indiana and Brown County start to walk away from that. If you think about what was happening in the 90s, we were thinking about mass consumerism. And a lot of those artisans couldn't pass on their efforts. And you started to see more airbrushed t-shirts and mass-produced wares from China and things like that. The artisan community was really falling away. And I think Nashville, Indiana was in a lot of trouble there for a while. Enter Bigwoods, who wanted to be uniquely from that place. They took this artisan mentality to their beer that really spoke to the place, and it's revitalized that community. Bigwoods came. We had some younger artisans trying to move in as well at the same time. A couple years later, Brown County State Park puts in one of the best mountain biking circuits in the Midwest. It became a destination for younger people from Chicago, Cincinnati, St. Louis to go mountain biking on the weekend. Bigwoods came in at exactly the right time, because what do mountain bikers like to do in the evenings? They like to drink beer. Because if you're crazy enough to go on a mountain bike down a hill with tree roots, then you probably like a little beer as well. And so they've dived further into their thinking. They now have a complex on the outskirts of Nashville, Indiana, in Brown County called Hard Truth Hills, where it's home to their new distillery as well. They're making spirits. But other smaller distillers and brewers have popped up in Brown County. And Brown County really doesn't have that many people that live there. It's a tourist place, right? But it's created a culture surrounding beer and liquor in the area. And it's breathed new life into that community. If you think about Nashville, Indiana, what's always been there is the artisan community. Just what that artisan community is producing has changed now. So what's Irvington's barley? You know, this is similar to that water question, which is what differentiates Irvington. But what is more perhaps historic for Irvington that Irvington can tap into as they think about creative placemaking events?
If we do much more with Halloween, we're all going to die.
Well, but yes, a rich Halloween culture here, right? With the, the ghouls of Irvington, right? Okay. So in the barley, I've used a barn there. Go ahead and, what are some kernels from Irvington's past that we can maybe tap into? I mean, we're sitting in a room that has a lot of those stories in it. And it strikes me that this place can be a really great brainstorming jumping off point. All right, I'll move forward. We'll add some time in for brainstorming there. So this is Old Mecklenburg Brewery in Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte, North Carolina is a banking center. There are some really great cities in North Carolina. Charlotte kind of has the reputation of being the least cultural, least artistic, because it is that banking center. Maybe some banking executives here and there, but kind of buttoned up, kind of white collar. a lot of old industrial neighborhoods, kind of like Nashville, Tennessee, kind of devoid of the arts a little bit. Old Mecklenburg started with a mural. This brewery moved in and said, we want a conversation piece. We want to have this outdoor beer garden, but it's kind of gross, the cinder block wall. We've got, these loading docks in the background. There's nothing really to look at to inspire you. And so, huge mural painted by the artist Drea Cofield, who actually earned her art degree from DePaul University in Greencastle. Huge mural, and it started a kind of movement in that neighborhood to provide more public art. It was kind of the launching pad for this public art movement in what is now a really mixed-use neighborhood. So it started something. It brought a little interesting funkiness to the neighborhood. So when we think about yeast, the fourth ingredient in beer, we think about funkiness. This is the living part of the beer. There are little bugs in your beer, and the yeast eats the sugar and makes alcohol. So what makes Irvington funky? What's the yeast? What's the thing that keeps things moving and alive here? So we're kind of wrapping up here. We've got a list of 4 different groups of things that we can maybe combine in a recipe for creative placemaking in this area. I really want to reinforce this idea of place. We think of the old, especially German-style beer hall. It was a center for quality of place. It's where you went to have a meeting. It's where you went to have social engagements. There didn't necessarily have to be an event. The event was the people there. We're reinventing that in the craft beer community. Think about beer gardens. Think about that picture I had of 18th Street Brewery in Gary, where we wanted to do more with art and make people stay a while. Craft breweries are really reinventing this. Next time you go to a brewery, Indiana City down the road, Sun King does a really nice job of this in downtown Indy. It feels like a destination. So urban areas are really doing this well, and they're well positioned to contribute due to their size. So we're seeing breweries host yoga on Saturday mornings, where you do yoga, and then what's better after a cleansing, spiritual yoga journey than a beer, right? It doesn't seem like it goes together, but these events are wildly popular. We see the connection with kind of classical music. Tad Armstrong is a nationally renowned jazz singer. And here he is playing at Big Woods Pizza in Nashville, Indiana. We're marrying high culture with a mass audience. And then, of course, Oktoberfest celebrations, harkening back to that kind of old-style beer hall type deal. So you can't see in the background, but I've got some pictures of those 450 North slushies. It strikes me that there's often a special ingredient, and Again, those fruit purees, not in the old Bavarian purity laws, but 450 North's added those in. I think it's important to think about what's your twist. What makes it uniquely Irvington, or whatever place you're trying to do some cultural creative placemaking with. And these are the stakes. Excuse me. These are the stakes for a community: economic development, recirculation of income, the reuse of vacant, underutilized land, buildings, and infrastructure, job creation, promoting that next generation of entrepreneur, but also that next generation of cultural worker. If you make it of a place, it's a badge of pride. I think about these kind of retro t-shirt companies that are popping up all over the country. There's one here in town called The Shop, where they make all these vintage Indianapolis t-shirts. I got a t-shirt for my mom from there for her birthday. It's a Marsh t-shirt. Marsh is a unique Indianapolis supermarket, and my mom is very mad that Marsh Supermarkets is gone because she can't get the service she once did at Kroger or Walmart. But think about all these organizations in Indianapolis, and they make these t-shirts for Roslyn Bakery, Hooks. They have a t-shirt that says, "I still call it Deer Creek." It's a conversation starter. It's a sense of pride in where you are from. It's something that makes your city uniquely yours. And let's be really honest, Indianapolis is not that different from Columbus, Ohio. It's not that different from Cincinnati, Ohio. But there are some things about our community that we take pride in that is uniquely us. We have to dive deeper into those things to create place, to attract and retain non-arts-related businesses and skills. These artisans want to make something true. They want to make something that inspires them about the place they're in. And they want to inspire other people. And only through creative placemaking, it strikes me, can we inspire that. And so I hope by talking here for the last hour about what craft beer has been doing to capture some of these ideas, we can think about our cultural arts organizations in different ways and how we can plan new events, how we can change current events, how we can transform our spaces to make them more distinctly of the place around it and less of the same thing that you would find in a community that's like us, maybe a Cincinnati, a Columbus, okay? Well, that is my talk. Hopefully you are leaving this talk with a full list of things that make your community unique and interesting and noteworthy and story-worthy. As a writer, I really care about story. And I think story moves people, and I think story enriches our world. And I think story is the thing that people take with them. And it strikes me that's what we're trying to do when we plan a cultural event or we try to create a space. And so hopefully this gives you some ideas moving forward. That's all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.